Can you hear me? So the uh, the day was February 28th. The year was 1983. The place was Phoenix, Arizona, John C. Lincoln Memorial Hospital, and yeah, I don't remember much of that. But I was born to the family of Arlen and Becky Geigley. I had an older sister, Juanita, that was 3 years older than me, and then it was me. And I guess at the time, my family was pretty poor. Dad had just started the business the year before, and things were pretty tight. But my grandma, there's my grandpa Geigley's. Not a very good picture of him. Then my parents, Juanita, and myself. No, there's Juanita. That must be Janelle. And then there's Glenn and Anna Lois Miller. They were also there on that picture. So Grandma worked for a pretty wealthy Jewish doctor, the way I understand. And their children were older than us, and we got a lot of their hand-me-downs, and that's pretty much what I grew up on. And there's my grandma and grandpa Burkholder in Indiana. Don't remember just a whole lot of them. They were in Indiana, we were in Phoenix, and my mom was the last one of a fairly large family. So by the time I knew them, Grandpa was already retired, and so yeah. And then in February of 1986, oh, there's my first birthday. February of 86, Janelle was born. She was the third one. And then also that same month in 1986, Dad was ordained minister. And looking back, that probably had one of the biggest impacts on my life, that whether good, bad, or otherwise, but then everything revolved around the ministry in our family. There's just Juanita and I. And that little lawnmower there, that's Max Walker. He was the founder and inventor of the Walker mowers, and that little mower right there probably saved our family, at least financially. That is how Dad got his start. Being in Phoenix, we did not get to experience snow, so one time Dad took us up to Flagstaff, and that was our first time in the snow. Also, there is typical Sunday afternoon. I guess we would play church. Sometimes I was no one to preach. And then in 89, Jared was born with spinal meningitis. Didn't know what it was at first, but the doctor, or one of the nurses, saw he had a fever as soon as he was born, or his temperature was a little high, so put him on antibiotics right away, and that was probably what saved him. We didn't know if he would be blind or deaf or what. We were kind of scared, but everything turned out okay. I was not a very obedient boy. I got lots of spankings and was very naughty. That was what I remember growing up, is getting a spanking about every day. And then in 1992, well, earlier than that, the church started moving out of Phoenix. People wanted to raise their families outside the city, and we were one of the last families to move. My grandparents, I think, were the last family, and we moved in May of 92 up here to Colorado. The only ones that moved to Colorado with us were Phil Stutzman's, my grandparents, and our family. And this was probably one of the first, I think this is like the first Christmas program at school. There's Ryan Stutzman, Eugene Beachy. I don't know if that's Levon. It almost looks like Levon. And then Lauren and Anthony Hostetler and myself. And that was at our old church and Jehovah Witness church that ended up burning. And then, yeah, one of the first things, well, we rented for a year, and then we got moved out to the place where Mom and Dad are now. And one of the first things we did was build a barn. So there in 1995, had a series of accidents. Any one of them could have killed me, probably. Probably the worst one was where I busted my stomach open by belly flopping off of a jump on a bike. And one of them is pretty serious concussion. I think that's the one there. And there was a couple other ones, but yeah. Also, in the early days, many of the men in church had horses, and so in the summer, I think there was like 3 summers in a row there where we would take off for a few days and go ride in the mountains. And I was the Stutzmans did not have horses, so I think I was the only boy that went along, and that was on Dallas's Little Pony. That was a lot of fun, being up in the mountains. Also, much of our travel revolved around the ministry, and this was one time where Rich Berkey's and our family, we traveled to the North Dakota campground meetings. And then in 96, Dad built the house that they're in now. Him and I did a lot of the work. And then in 1998, Dad turned 40 years old. And right before he turned 40, so the week before, he got ordained bishop. And then we went and climbed Mount Snuffles, Rich Berkey's and us. And I was into rock climbing, and I remember Dad I kept saying, I could climb that. And he stopped the vehicle and he said, here, go climb that. And so I climbed right up there, and then I got to the top, and I was like, how do I get down? He goes, well, you'll figure it out. I put this picture in here because that was right over the time Dad got ordained bishop. And the next 10 years were pretty rough years, especially for me, with Dad being in the ministry and everything. Then in 1999, we went to Indiana for a few months to take care of my grandma. And I went to the Whistler School there. And we were right in the Whistler community, so I got to know a lot of the Whistler people. And at 16, that was my first vehicle. I thought it was pretty cool, and it was no PT Cruiser. Carrie wanted me to use the word PT Cruiser tonight. And then in 2001, I started working at Montrose Implement. And this was sometime in the early 2000s there. My uncle Marty, that'd be Mom's brother, there in Phoenix, he loves to hike the Grand Canyon. He used to hike it once or a couple times a year. And so he kind of organized this trip. So there's my uncle Marty and his brother Bob. And then this is Neil Bear. He's married to Mom's sister. And then his boys there. And my brother, Dad, and myself, and cousin that's my age from Alberta also, Mom's other sister's boy. We all hiked the Grand Canyon, and we spent the night in and came out the next day. In 2005, I had my, well, before that, that's one thing I was going to put in there. We had our passports because we had went to Belize when Ita was down there for over a year. And Mom's cousins, I think it was, were there at my parents' place, and he was with CAM, and I said I would enjoy going on a work project somewhere. And he said they had a cancellation of a guy. There was a group that needed another guy leaving the next month to go to Indonesia. It was after the tsunami. And so I had my passport. It was all good to go. And I got plane tickets and went with a bunch of guys I never knew for 3 weeks to Indonesia to help rebuild over there. This picture is actually taken at the tallest twin towers in the world, the Petronas Towers in Malaysia. We did some sightseeing on the way back for a day. This was on top of a barge in the middle of the city. That barge had floated in on the tsunami and plopped down top of houses. And so there were squatters living on top of it, but we went and they dropped a ladder down and we climbed up it and got to see around. And then also in 2006, the next year, we went to Mississippi to rebuild with CAM after the Katrina. I think that was 2006. 2000 probably about 2006. Me and another guy, we drove to Belize. Neither of us knew Spanish. We were very young. And I don't know what our parents were thinking, but they left us go, and we drove all the way to Belize through Mexico. In 2007, my sister was getting married, Janelle, and she was going to go to Europe on an Anabaptist tour with CAM. And my aunt and uncle were along, and some of Mom's cousins. And she invited Gwen and another of her friends, Colleen, to go with her, because Sheldon, there's no way he wanted to go. And I said, well, I'll go along with you guys. And that's where I met my wife, Gwen. And when we got back, not too long, I asked her and we started dating. That was the only picture I could find where we were both together on the same picture. Then 2008, we got married. In 2010, Amber was born. And we went to Belize again, also with Gwen's parents. We flew into Cancun and we bussed down and we took the water taxi part of the way. That was a very highlight of a trip. And then we bussed all the way to the southern tip of Belize. We're there, and then we bussed all the way back to Cancun. We ran out of money on the way home. We ended up at the Cancun airport and like 2 o'clock at night, and it was closed. So we slept in the entryway. Uh, 2015, Megan was born. And then many of you probably have never met Cheryl, Gwen's sister. She died April 28th of that year in childbirth. Giving childbirth. 2017, Carrie was born. 2019, Andrew. And then highlight of that was Dad had always talked about going back to over the bridge of heaven to Difficulty and stuff, hunting. A bunch of the church guys would hunt back there and stuff, and they hadn't in years and years. And us boys had never been back there. And Jared said he wanted to take Jared back there before we moved, and so we got horses, and he took us back there, and we were supposed to spend 2 nights, but we had some horse problems and whatnot, and we only spent 1 night. That was a very enjoyable trip with my dad, brother, and 2 brother-in-laws. April of 22, we left for Bangladesh, and I never in my wildest dreams would have thought I would ever sit in a bamboo and tarpaulin shelter in a refugee camp, but here I was, um, sharing a meal there with some Rohingya refugees. That was that was a pretty rough time in our lives. That was a lot of faith to go over there, um, a lot of growing, but a lot of good experiences. And then in 2023, we returned home. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have. One thing I thought about in studying for this was how, I grew up in the same family as brothers and sisters, and we all had different experiences, and we all have different perspectives on life, just from how things, how we had to face things differently. And I think that's the same for all of us, and it's all um, the experiences that we have is all shaped by um, our youth and how we had to face things. So
Well, good evening. I don't have as exciting of a story as Wendell, but as you can see, these pictures here are very old. Because these are pictures of pictures, because back in the 40s and 50s, they did not have digital. So I took pictures of pictures. And this one here is my grandparents, and that is two pictures put together because my grandparents were Amish, and you could not get them together to pose for a picture, so we just snuck them in. And I don't know who took it, but that was a long time ago. I have a question. Is there anybody here that had a grandparent that was born in the 1800s? Raise your hand. You did? All right. Well, that's good. I just wanted to see how old everybody is. Okay. All right. Well, there was quite a few of you then. That's great. My grandmother there was born in 1896. I don't know what grandfather was. Their names is Noah and Sarah Weaver. And one thing that we have in common with Wendell is my grandparents also lived in Indiana. They were from Napanee, Indiana. So at that time, my dad would have been Amish. As you can see there, that is his siblings, him and his siblings. He is the tallest boy, and at that time he would have been with the Amish. This is the grandparents. The best picture I have of uh, this would be Earl and Effie Yoder. And that would be my mother's parents. As you can see, my mother standing on the left, right beside my grandfather. So, one of the many things that I remember is about going visiting there. We would go about once a year, and they lived in Norfolk, so it's right close to Virginia Beach, and we would get a chance to go to the beach whenever we would go there. That there is a picture of my grandmother, a lot closer up. She was a very good woman, and she had a lot to do with I guess had a lot of effect on my mother because my mother was also a very good woman. There is a picture of the Yoders and the Weaver family together. Um, my mom and dad would be to the right, right close to the back. Dad with the white shirt, and mom was right in front of him. So I remember that picture being taken. By the way, if you want to see me when I was little, on the bottom left corner, kneeling down, that would be me. All right, let's do this again. On the left. There, that's me right there. That's a picture of my mother with three of her brothers. Now, can you see any resemblance there? Why I look like I do? That's my mother and father when they got married. It's on their wedding day, and yeah, I love that picture. My brother said one time, "Boy, mom sure is pretty. I'd have married her too." There is the house that we lived in Amelia, Virginia. That's where I was born. I was born in that house. Um, all of our children were born at home. All of my siblings were all born at home. And as you'll see a little bit later, there's a few of us. And that is the house where we lived in Virginia. That's my mother coming out of that house, and she's all excited because her brother, Clark, had come to visit. I don't know how many of you know anything about peanuts, but that's what that is. That is mounds of peanuts that were pulled, and they turn them upside down so that they dry, and they let them dry that way for a while before they actually pick them off. And that is three of my oldest brothers right there um, picking the peanuts. As you can tell, there's a lot of washer on the line because that was back in the day we didn't have dryers. That is a picture of all my siblings and myself except one. My youngest brother, Delbert, is not in that picture. Now there's a picture of all the children and my mother, which is in the center. So that would be my family right there. There is a picture of, at that point, I can see my brother's wife back there, so that would be a couple of the in-laws and also the grandchildren in the front. Now, before we go any further than that, I just want to say that I don't know how many of you have fed a lot of people, but just think about feeding that many people 3 times a day, and also the wash that it takes for that many people. No automatic washers or dryers. Everything was washed with a wringer washer, hung out on the line, and then, of course, taken in and folded and put away. A lot of work. There was no microwaves. Um, the other thing is when we were in that house there in Virginia, I wanted to mention that and I forgot it. Is we had no meat to eat unless we went out and killed it. So we would go out and shoot groundhogs, and that's what we would eat. And then we would go to the pond and we would shoot, we'd go out at night, we would shoot frogs and eat frog legs. And by the way, they are delicious in case you wanted to know. So what we ate for greenery, so what we didn't get out of the garden, which we had a garden, but we would pick. We called them pig ears. They were a wide leaf that you'd find in the yard. We'd pick those and cook them, and they tasted a lot like spinach. Stuff that people would never dream of eating today, but that's how we had to live if we wanted to survive. And yes, we were very poor. Can you imagine why? Imagine buying the groceries for all those people. All right, there is a little sample of our harvest. Now, this here would be in Pennsylvania now. And we had many, many trailer loads like that. We planted 20 pounds of pea seeds a year, about 150 pounds of potatoes, and you can imagine the harvest of the potatoes with that many seeds, and also with the peas. That was back in the day. We had no pea sheller except our fingers, and we would sit and shell as a family. We would shell bushels and bushels and bushels of peas, and it was good times. It was good for us because you know how children are. We get tired of it, but Mom would keep us going. And what I wanted to say about her is that through all that many children, all the food that she made, all the washing, the gardening, there's not one of us that can remember an angry word out of her mouth. So she was a special woman. This is me and my wife and the 5 boys. This was before Brenda was born. I do not know what year that would have been, but Daniel would be in the back. Marvin is right next to him, and then Stephen is right in front of Ruth. And then we have Alan, and Neil is the smallest there. This is what they did. They spent a lot of time in the trees, walking. They were all over. We lived on 5 acres with surrounded by woods and fields, and they would be within a mile or two radius of the house, just playing their hearts out. I think that's all the pictures I've got. So, what I wanted to say is that we did not have a lot of money, but we had a lot of love for each other, and that's the most important. And it doesn't take money to live. It don't take money. Well, it takes money to live, but it doesn't take money to be happy. You can be happy without it. Um, Sometimes it gets a little frustrating, but um, that's just a matter of your attitude. You don't have to have a bad attitude because you don't have money, and I'm thankful for it because now in my situation, I know how to do it. I can live that way. I don't have to have everything, and I'm a happy person, and I'm thankful for my wife. We got married in 1980, and was March 29, 1980. So we've had a good time together, and we still do. So I don't know. I planned to cut this very short and made it. I really condensed it. So there you go. Now you know. Now you know about me a little bit. It's hard to put 67 years into a few minutes, but that's just a little short version of it, and that's all I have. Oh, that's right. I was going to mention that, and I forgot it. We moved out here in August the 1st of 2001. We have 40 acres. I purchased those 40 acres a few months earlier, and there was absolutely nothing on that 40 acres, and there was nothing anywhere close. The closest house was a mile away. There was no driveway. You just drive through the field to get back in there. We are living a half a mile off the road, and everything that's there, we had to put there. When we arrived in August the 1st of 2001, we arrived there with no shelter. My brother drove my truck out with the load. My wife and I brought a van and a trailer. And my brother got there a day earlier. And so he found a 12 by 56 house trailer. And it was within seeing distance of the property. So when I got there, he showed it to me and he said, "You want to go see it?" I said, "Yes, I do." So we went there. We paid $1,200 for it. And we pulled it over there, and we did not have any electric or water for 5 years. My wife said if I would have known it would be that long, she don't know what she'd have done. I said didn't know it either. And I don't know what I'd have done, but we lived one day at a time, and then in 5 years later, we put in a house, and then we got electric and water. Water we had to dig from the road all the way up and put a water line in. Meanwhile, the electric was halfway up our driveway, which made it a lot cheaper because it would have cost me a lot of money to put electric in. But we had a neighbor that put it in halfway up the driveway, and so we only had to go from there up to our house. So we're thankful today for what we got, and we feel blessed to be here. We're thankful for the church, and we're blessed by that as well. Any more questions? Okay, that was interesting. So Wenda would remember that we would come out to visit every once in a while. And when we decided that we wanted to live here, we had visited again, and I got a hold of the High Country Shopper, and I had them ship that to me once a month. And there was a little ad in there, and all it said was own 40 acres for less than the price of a luxury car. That was the ad. So I got to thinking, 40 acres for less than a luxury car. That can't be that bad a price. So I called him. His name was Jim Carr. And I talked to him about it. It was owner financed, and that was the reason that we got the house in 5 years, because it was owner financed for 5 years. And then we had to pay off the bloom, and that's how we got the house. And we got a mortgage and did that. So then I flew out here. I met Jim Carr at C&J's in Delta, and we talked about the place. He took me out, and I bought it from him right there. And then a few months later, we had an auction. We sold our property there in Pennsylvania, and then loaded up and came out. Any more questions? Okay, so we lived in Snyder County, Pennsylvania, and then in 1975, we moved to Lebanon County. And that's where Ruth was. We went to church at Royer's Mennonite Church in Lebanon, actually in Myerstown. And we moved within 4 miles of Ruth's house. And I remember the first time I met her. I moved about 2 weeks before the rest of the family did. And because I had a job I had to go to. And that's when I started working for Carmen Beachy's Granville. And I was welding at that time. And of course, I was there with a couple of my sisters. And Ruth and her sister brought a meal over for me, or for us. And that's where I guess that was love at first sight. But then, of course, it was a few years later till I actually started dating her. And what happened there was that I was thinking of her and taking my time. I was praying and seeing what the Lord had for me. And one day, I came home from work, and my mom was out in the garden. It's where she spent her time. She loved gardening, and she would be there whenever she could. So I went out to help her. So it was just Mom and I, and we were out there talking while we were working. And she says, "John, I think Ruth would make you a good wife." And that's all I needed, and it was uphill from there. All right, any more? You mean in Pennsylvania? It was 5 acres. And we planted everything that you plant. I mean, red beets, beans, lima beans, everything. And that really kept us busy. Can you imagine pulling all the weeds, hoeing, picking and harvesting everything? 5 acres, that included our sweet corn as well. It might be easier to say, what didn't I do? I started out at 13 years old, working for my dad. My dad was a carpenter, and the first job I had was that we had a motel that we made apartments in that motel. I went to work on the first day, and my dad says, "I want you to put the trim around those doors and windows." Remember, I was 13 years old. I'm like, okay, how do I do that? I don't know how. He says, "You'll never learn any younger." So he showed me how to do it, and so I did carpenter work for a while. I did logging for a while. I started driving truck at 17. Of course, I grandfathered into that CDL business, which was more nuisance than good. But anyways, um, so I drove log truck. I bought my own truck. I started working for a company that they would take the trailers off of the train cars, and then I would go and deliver them, whatever, pick up stuff, bring back. We did that for a while. Three of my brothers joined me, and so four of us worked for that company for a while. Then we started our own business, own trucking company. We've done that for actually until I moved out here. So I've done welding. I worked in a welding shop for 9 years. I've done refrigeration. I've done body work. I had my own body shop for 3 years. My main job was collision. I would take cars that were wrecked and sometimes I'd cut them in half, put two halves together. Trucks that were rolled over, I'd fix them all up, paint them. I had a bunch of young fellows, Mennonite boys that wanted fancy cars and couldn't afford them. So they'd go buy a wrecked one, they'd bring it to me, and I would fix them up for them. Some of them only had 200 miles on them or something like that. So I've done that. Oh, I don't know. I don't know what all I've done. I was kind of a jack of all trades, a master of none. If you want to call it that. We had 47 acres in Snyder County. We planted field corn. Of course, we picked it all by hand. We planted small grains and had somewhat of a combine. Didn't have any cab or anything on it, just an open little tiny thing that's probably about a 12-foot head on it. So we combined that. We did a lot of mechanic work. My brother had started a mechanic shop, and I kind of grew up in a mechanic shop, so I guess that was another thing I did. And I did do repairs for a sawmill, worked on all their equipment. So I did a lot of different things. Okay, no. No, what happened there was my dad was in CPS camp when he was like 18, something like that. And he started out in South Dakota working on a dam. And then he was transferred to Norfolk, Virginia. And that's where he met my mother, and they were Mennonites, a Virginia conference. And so they were there till I think he had about 5 children there in Norfolk. Then they moved to Amelia, Virginia, and that's where I was born. Any more? I think I was 42 when we moved to Colorado, and we had all 6 children. Brenda would have been about 6 years old. Any more? Okay. So there was 15 of us children. There was 8 boys and 7 girls. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention that mother loved children so much that before she passed away, she had fostered over 50 children, and she had 65 grandchildren. Any more questions? I mean, I could talk a long time if you wanna. If you ask the questions, I could talk for a long time. But anyhow, I guess that'll do for now. Now you know why I am the way I am.
Let's stand and sing 528. Louis, do you want to dismiss us with prayer after we're done singing? Christian hymnal.